see just down the street. think he wants to go with the other class. Good evening. Welcome on this rainy Wednesday night. Between here and Perrytown, it is coming a flood. It lightened up some by the time I got here. I'm thankful. I was able to get out of the vehicle and get in. It is South State tournament time, and Mackenzie has a game. Well, it started at 6. She ought to be done, but they never start on time. They're probably wrapping up now. So that's where Tammy and the girls are. They've got a game tonight, MAIS. Scheduled games for tonight, Wednesday night, and no games for Thursday night. With much protest from me, it evidently doesn't matter, but they're playing games tonight, but hopefully maybe they won. That put us back playing maybe Friday night, Saturday night kind of thing. Tonight we are in Samuel chapter 19. We've already had some conflict between David and Saul. Saul has tried to stick David to the wall of his room with a spear twice now while David was playing music for him. Saul is, here in chapter 9, there's a few main things that take place. One of them is that we see that, using our lingo, we would say that Saul is slipping further and further into madness. David is going to begin a flight from Saul. After this chapter, David is going to be on the run, and that's where he's going to be until he takes the throne. And so that all happens here in chapter 19. It is a rather short chapter. Tried to get over in time to get the video equipment set up and all that, and it turns out that I don't remember how to do most of it. So it'll be evident for the folks watching the video. They're not going to have the picture-in-picture and all that good stuff that Elizabeth knows how to do that I don't remember how to do now. But nevertheless, we're going to press on. Do these lights need dimmed a little bit right here? If it does, you guys can dim these lights a bit if you want. Chapter 19. We'll just begin with the reading of the text. And Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. And if I learn anything, I will tell you. I'm going to back up. We'll stop there at verse 3. We see Jonathan's friendship with David. Last chapter, chapter 18, Jonathan gave David his robe. He gave him quite a few articles of clothing, and we talked about that being a symbolic gesture. This is Jonathan abdicating his rightful place, his rightful place as heir to the throne, to David. Jonathan is undoubtedly devoted to David, even in light of his father's anger towards David. Jonathan is seeking to protect him. He's going to help him hide. He's going to help him get away for the time being, right? And he's going to go talk to his dad, see if he can pry any information out of him and report back to David. So they're pretty good friends. Verse 4, Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him, let not the king sin against his servant David, because he's not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you. For he took his life in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine, and the Lord worked a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause? Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan reported to him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. So we have Jonathan the mediator, right? He's going on behalf of David, speaking to his father, try to talk some sense into him, and he reasons, and he uses logic, and it makes sense, right? David has done some really good things. He's took his own life in his hand, didn't have to, defeated the Philistine, brought this great victory to Israel. This is good for David, it's good for you, and everything has been good. David's done nothing wrong. and that it would be a sin to shed his blood. And Saul listened, at least, well, temporarily. He makes a vow here in verse 6. As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. A pretty strong vow on Saul's part. However, it's not going to last. David gets to resume his position, working in Saul's presence, playing his music for Saul, soothing him. We would say it's right back to normal, as it was. Verse 8, and there was war again. David went out and fought with the Philistines, struck them with a great blow so that they fled before him. Then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand. And David was playing the lyre. I'm going to pause right there. We have one verse, verse 8, that shifts from Saul's vow to not harm David to David being back in Saul's presence playing music again. And it's one verse about David going back out to war, defeating the Philistines and coming back. We know that Saul is angered, or what brought on his jealousy or his madness with David was the women singing, right? Saul struck down thousands, David struck down tens of thousands and angered Saul. So now David's gone out to war with the Philistines. Might argue that Saul has put David ahead of this company of the valiant men or men of valor, so that he would have opportunity to kill David by the hand of the Philistines, if you will, and send him to war. Hopefully the Philistines will deal with David and that'll be taken care of. But David is victorious, and it would seem that aggravates Saul. Saul is desiring for David to be killed by the Philistines. Verse 9, the harmful spirit from the Lord comes back upon Saul as he sat in his house with a spear in his hand. I don't know if that's normal behavior for a king. I couldn't find anything or read anything about it, but David has had that spear thrown at him a couple times now, and the king, who does not like David, is just sitting around holding the spear. Body language alone isn't enough to make you want to probably go hang out in another room, right? I mean, realistically, he's thrown this thing at you a couple times. You're probably gonna have your head on a swivel, right? Verse 10, and Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul, so that he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. Third time is the charm. Someone throws a spear at you 3 times, it's probably best to go ahead and just leave, right? I think that's probably a good policy, just to go ahead and establish. David flees from Saul. He escapes that night. He gets away, and this is going to begin. This is going to be the beginning point for David as a fugitive. Right here. Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him so that he might kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, told him, if you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Michal took an image and laid it on the bed, put a pillow of goat's hair at its head, and covered it with clothes. So his wife, privy to her father's plans, warns David. That's great, right? Remember, Michal loved David. Saul thought that's great. He was going to give David his oldest daughter, which would make David next in line to the throne, but instead he gave her to someone else. And so when he found out that the younger daughter, Michal, loved David, he said, oh, that's good, that's fine. Give her to him, and that'll be all right. So Michal loves David. She warns him. And then verse 13 might be perhaps the first recorded, high school kid, teenage prank we see played right here. It's the old stick a dummy in the bed and cover it up with sheets and fool mom and dad, make them think I'm home when I'm not kind of a thing here. We got what amounts to a scarecrow put in the bed and covered up, and that sort of thing going on. We're going to trick the messengers that Saul sends, make them think David's sick, and they'll go away, right? That's the intention. Verse 14, when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he's sick. Saul sent the messengers to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him. When the messengers came in, behold, the image was in the bed, and the pillow of goat's hair at its head. So it worked for a time. Now, right, think about what Michal is trying to accomplish here. She let David out of the window. He's had time to run. The more time she buys, the further away he can get. Right? He can flee. He can get some ground between he and Saul, and the more ground, the better. So that's what happened. She's bought him some time and distance, is what it amounts to. Verse 17, Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me, and thus let my enemy go, so that he has escaped? And Michal answered Saul, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? Interesting, because, one, pretty sure David didn't say that, right? You know, David, we see in the text of Scripture, and what we come to know of him later, is really not the kind of guy that would threaten his wife, right? Not threaten her life like that. Michal loved David. She desired him. She's covering for him. She's just making sure that she stays out of trouble with her dad, is what it amounts to. Now, I would have much rather heard her say something like a quote from Genesis saying, you know, the husband and wife shall leave their family and cling to one another, that sort of thing. You know, that would have been pretty good. You know, she'd have said, well, you know, he's my number one. That would have been great. He's my number one priority. His authority or his thoughts of me mean more than yours. That would have been pretty good. Right? That would have been a good thing for her to say, biblically sound. However, she did sort of like Abraham. It was Abraham and his wife are traveling, and let's see, they were camped out down around Bathsheba, and I'm trying to think of the king's name that took his wife Sarah, and he told her that she was his sister. Started a story I can't finish. So we see Abraham would tell a little bit of what we would call a lie to try to cover for their situation. We see Michal doing the same thing. Actually, that same scenario pops up a lot throughout the text of Scripture, being an interesting study. So we have David's wife covering for him, then covers her own tale to her dad. Everything is okay right there. And in verse 18, David fled and escaped. And he came to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and lived at Naioth. And it was told Saul, behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. And then Saul sent messengers to take David. And when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, Samuel standing his head over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. We know that Samuel is from Ramah. That's where he hangs his hat. That's where he lives. David fled to Samuel. Samuel has anointed him king. Samuel is the prophet. He was the judge before Saul was anointed king. Samuel is the next guy that if you were going to look for some authority, some sway with the people, he is the guy that you would go to. That makes sense for David to flee to Samuel. Now, the place, Naioth, and we're going to see another place name here in a moment. Naioth is, it's probably a camp within Ramah. It's, in fact, the word itself kind of points to an encampment or a tribe within a tribe sort of thing. It's probably the encampment that the company of prophets has built. Samuel lives at Ramah. This camp is also in Ramah. Samuel and David leave Samuel's house. They go across town or whatever to get to the place where the prophets are camping out. This is Naioth in Ramah. The interesting thing is we have this group of messengers that has been sent to retrieve David from Samuel. And as soon as they draw near to the company of prophets, Samuel standing nearby, the Spirit of God comes upon the messengers of Saul, and they prophesied. It's interesting. It'd be an interesting study because we don't generally see the Holy Spirit or the Spirit of God working on people particularly like this. Now, this is the second time here in 1 Samuel. The first time that Samuel anointed Saul at Ramah. He sent Saul on a journey back north, remember, and he was passing by a company of prophets here, and Saul began to prophesy. And it's sort of like we see here. Not in and of anything that Saul had done that he started prophesying, much like these messengers. It seems almost contagious in nature. It's interesting study. But as we press on, we see that the first group of messengers encounters the company of prophets in Samuel, and they prophesied. And when it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they also prophesied. And Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they also prophesied. Saul is pretty persistent, if nothing else. But it's interesting that, again, the messengers themselves, they are just drawing near to follow the orders of the king, and then they are overwhelmed, if you will, by the Spirit of God. That's pretty amazing. Side note, we have another king, King Ahab, I believe, sent messengers to Elijah. If you remember, he sent a group of messengers. Elijah called down fire, consumed the messengers. He sent another company a second time. He called down fire, consumed the messengers. And the third group that came through, as he was about to call them down, they begged for mercy and said, "We're just here to bring a message," sort of thing. And he relented and didn't call down fire upon them. Kings are pretty persistent when it doesn't involve themselves, right? Except for here, in verse 22, Saul decides to make the trip himself. Now, verse 22, then he himself went to Ramah and came to the great well that is in Secu. And he asked, "Where are Samuel and David?" One said, "Behold, they're at Naioth and Ramah." So we have a well, and it's even described as the great well. The word, the place name, Secu, is in Hebrew, it is a designation for size. Kind of like the way we use feet or yards or whatever. We're talking about how long some of that bench right there is about 8 yards long right there. It's kind of like what's going on with this well here. It's described as being a great well, and the word Secu just sort of describes that to a further extent. It's been capitalized for, well, probably as long as we've had English translation, so it's part of liturgy now, so they just kind of keep capitalizing it. A lot of names are like that, where they're actually describing a place rather than the actual proper name of a place. But nevertheless, I only mention that just because it's a curious notation. But Secu, this great well, it probably has walls around the well built up kind of tall. That's what the Secu means. It's a big well, could be great in diameter, great in depth, or great in quantity for water, either which way. Secu denotes the wall around it being sort of tall or sizable. So they meet here. Wells are a good gathering place. We know that through our study of the Old Testament. Wells are just a place to meet folks. It's a good place, good community place. And so Saul comes to town, and he wants to know here in verse 22, "Where are Samuel and David?" And said, "Behold, they're at Naioth and Ramah. They're at the camp of the prophets." So verse 23, he went there to Naioth and Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also. And as he went, he prophesied until he came to Naioth and Ramah. And he too stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel, and lay naked all that day and all that night. And thus, it is said, is Saul also among the prophets. Probably some intended symbolism going on here. Just like Jonathan's removal of his royal robe and his royal clothing and giving them to David was a sign of him stepping back and acknowledging David David's place as the next king. Saul stripping his clothes off is also a foreshadowing or a type of that which is to come. That is the removal of Saul from the throne and David's ascent to the throne. So there's quite a bit of symbolism in the text. On top of that, we would also note that it's, again, interesting, but not a lot can be done about it. We know that Saul has an evil spirit amongst him, and now he also has the Spirit of God, so that he's prophesying. The way the author plays the words, it becomes curious to us how both can be true, because we don't associate the two as inhabiting the same person. So what I would argue for in this particular instance is what we see as the providence of God. God is ensuring David's ascent to the throne. We have God's protection over David and seeing after him in battle. One, he's victorious over Goliath, and then all these multiple battles that he's already been engaged with the Philistines in, and protecting him from Saul. And so we see God playing a very active role in David's care and protection. That would be the main thing that we would try to pull away from the text. That's all of the chapter. It's a short chapter. I would have tried to, but because of the games and everything, I was trying to make sure I could get over here and get the camera and all that set up in time. But you have any thoughts or questions about this chapter? It is sort of a transition chapter. We go from David being fairly secure in Saul's presence to now he is a fugitive, and he's going to remain a fugitive. We have Saul drifting further into madness, if you will, and the friendship of David and Jonathan becoming more tight-knit, if you will, becoming stronger. That is chapter 19. We'll pick up chapter 20 next week. Maybe they get their lesson wrapped up back there. Ronnie, Miss Carol says she's going to tie you down so you couldn't do anything. I'm wondering what you did with her so you could get out of the house this evening. Mm-hmm. Miss Carol says she's going to have to tie you up or something to keep you from doing it.
About 10:30, kids going through there.
Yeah?
Yeah. And then Carol had to go shopping.
I see. She know you got out of the house?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't supposed to pick up anything heavier than, I don't supposed to pick up a gallon of milk, really, for a couple of days. They went through my wrist.
That's interesting.
I was thinking I was numbing me. They shaved down there by my groin and all, and I'm waiting for them to start working over there, talking to him and all, and he had my wrist down. I seen him looking up on the screen and everything. I told Carol when I come out of there, I said, they prep me and everything. They're going to put those stents in there. She said, I got news for you. She said, you got 2 stents in there already. They went through your wrist.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah. They so good now with that stuff. You know how you used that to do the dye? They just give you a couple of tablets to chew up.
Yeah, instead of shooting you